Geekom sent me their new Geekbook M16 laptop for review, and my interest in this computer is actually it's got a newer Intel Ultra 9 185H processor, which has 3 different types of cores: performance cores, efficiency cores, and low power cores. But since this video is sponsored by Geekom, let me tell you a bit more about this computer. It came packaged actually super nicely. Packaging is very impressive, and it's got an aluminum chassis, so no plastic, very solid. The display is 1080 by 1200, 16 inches. It's got 16 gigs of RAM and half a terabyte of SSD. Of course, you can get more RAM and more SSD in higher resolution displays, but that costs more. So I started out by measuring the performance using a very simple integer benchmark and forcing that to run on each core. And logical core number 1 was one of the fast ones. I couldn't force it onto logical core 0 because Windows just sort of interpreted that as any core. Then the next 8 cores were a little bit slower, and then we have 10 more fast cores and 2 really slow cores. So these are clearly the low power cores, and these ones with hyperthreading are actually 5 performance cores, and 0 and 1 are performance cores, and then cores 2 through 9 are the efficiency cores. So that numbering, at least how Windows presents it, had me a little bit confused for a while. Next, I ran a CRC benchmark where I was computing CRCs for multiple buffers at the same time. And if I ran it on just one buffer, the difference in the performance cores versus the efficiency cores was actually very minor, something like 10%. Of course, the low power cores were slower, but the more of these I ran at the same time, the more pipeline friendly that is. So the more complex performance cores did much better than the efficiency cores. Now, this is not using hyperthreading, so I'm using the full processor for one of these. If I ran 2 on both hyperthreads, it would be a bit slower. But nonetheless, you can see the more pipeline friendly the task is, the longer pipelines of the performance cores benefit. Now what's interesting here is even at the most pipeline friendly, the efficiency cores are still half as fast as the performance cores, which is quite different from the Intel i9 versus the Intel i9 Ultra in this one. So in this one, the difference was actually 1/3 the speed for the efficiency cores. So the efficiency cores in this laptop, the M16, with the Ultra 9, are actually much closer in performance to the performance cores than they are in the older one, like in that one. And what does that mean? I mean, if I look at various benchmarks for different processors, nobody goes into that sort of detail. Well, what it means is if you're using all the cores, the Ultra 9 is a bit faster than the Core 9. So comparing this Geekom, the IT13, with the M16 is about 13% faster if you're using all the cores in terms of net performance. But in terms of single core performance, this one is still faster than this one. And that's because this one's not a laptop, so they just run a bit harder than they do in this laptop. And by all the cores, I actually mean all but the low power cores, because for some reason I can't convince Windows to schedule any of my stuff on the low power cores unless I explicitly specify core number 20 or 21. And that's leaving some performance on the table because these 2 low power cores, even though they're half as fast as the other cores, there's 2 of them, and that could give me potentially another 5% net performance. And even if I manually spin up 22 threads, you'd think it would use those 2, but no, it doesn't. So I don't know if there's a technical reason or if it's just Windows hasn't quite adapted to having such different cores and actually making full use of them. So I just Googled this, and actually it makes more sense what they're doing. So the low power cores are actually on a separate little die, a little chiplet inside the processor, and if nothing else is happening, then Windows can shut down the main processor and just run things on the little one. But as soon as there's anything much happening, like Program Manager updating, then it's already switched to one of the main cores, which means it never really shows that there's stuff running on the low power cores. And it makes sense to idle the low power cores because it interacts with the same layer 3 cache as the main CPU, and apparently it has to run the layer 3 cache a bit slower if the low power cores are also running on it. I didn't see any effects of that with my benchmarks, but my benchmarks probably weren't hitting the layer 3 cache. So I guess that's why the low power cores don't appear to be used at all. And if in my simple little benchmarks I force some tasks to run on the low power cores, that consumes about 2/3 the amount of power per computation. Mind you, of course, the low power cores also run half as fast, so actually 1/3 the power, but it takes twice as long. But I guess it's not really so much about the low power cores being dramatically more efficient, it's just about being able to shut down the main die with the big CPU cores on it when the system is mostly idle. Now the Core Ultra 9 is more efficient than the Core i9 in this one, and that's because this one uses a 10 nanometer lithography, whereas this one uses Intel 4, which is actually a 7 nanometer lithography. So I imagine most of the efficiency just comes from smaller transistors. That said, in terms of computational efficiency, again, as best as I can measure, these two still beat that one, even though they're a little bit older, and this one also uses a 10 nanometer lithography. This is the Geekom A5 Pro, and this one is the Geekom A9 Max, and that one uses a 4 nanometer lithography. And this one isn't really geared for efficiency, it's just pushing the CPU really hard, but even so, thanks to the smaller lithography, it still beats it efficiency-wise. Now, I really had been hoping that Intel had caught up with TSMC in terms of lithography, but it appears not to be the case. But this is also not Intel's latest lithography. It's all a matter of what's practical to buy right now versus what's on the bleeding edge. Now, I have been using this laptop as my daily driver at the moment, although usually using the big monitor. But out of curiosity, as I'm editing the video on here with Kdenlive, I copied my files onto the A9 Max, which is my fastest PC, and rendering it on there versus running it on the laptop only takes 15% longer to render it than my fastest computer, so really not bad at all. Oh, and I should add, the fans on the laptop were making less noise while doing that than on this one. Now it's got two USB-C ports plus HDMI on this side, although I use one for charging, and on the other side, two regular USB-A ports, which is enough for using it. I've just been using it like that with my 4K monitor. Although one thing I wish it had that it doesn't have is a built-in SD card reader, so I have to use an external one. But it also comes with this thing here, which has got enough ports that basically I can plug the charger in here and then just plug this thing in here and get everything else off of here. So that I can kind of use this as a dock, and if I want to take it with me, I just have to unplug one cable, or two cable if I want to take the power supply with me, because that plugs into here. But I haven't been using this because this thing actually consumes quite a bit of power, and I've been trying to get a sense of how much power this computer actually uses. So I'm measuring with a TP-Link smart plug the power going into this adapter, which is at least 90% efficient, and graphing that on here. So just sitting around, it averages about 7.8 watts right now, unless I'm doing stuff with it. So scrolling back in here a little bit, this is using Kdenlive, where the average power is more like 20 watts. Now this thing comes with a 100 watt-hour battery, which is pretty good for a laptop this size. So I figure I should be able to get 10 hours out of it just doing regular stuff, although if I'm video editing, maybe just 5 hours. So I figured those battery life claims are maybe a little bit unrealistic, but then I disconnected the external monitor and all the peripherals, and also ran my power monitoring tool not on the laptop itself, but on a different computer. And then things changed a fair bit. So if I just have the laptop sitting there and I'm reading stuff off the screen, then after a while it gets down to 3.5 to 4 watts, which, you could do that for 24 hours on that battery life. But as soon as I'm typing stuff, then it gets to around 7 watts. If I'm watching video with VLC player, it's 7 watts. Again, it takes a while to settle down to that. If I'm watching YouTube videos, then I'm at 12 watts. And if I'm doing video editing, I'm back at 20 watts, same as using the external monitor. So basically the full idling and really low power is if I'm mostly reading stuff. It can run for a very long time at that. Of course, a better test of battery life would actually be to actually use the laptop itself to do work. It's just, if I'm going to do work, I want to use my 4K monitor if I can and a proper keyboard. So I'm not going to do that. And I'm not a fan of these modern super flat keyboards for the flat laptop computers because they just don't have enough key travel and also not enough force. I much prefer the older style keyboards like on this old ThickPad, which have more key travel and more force. They just feel more like a desktop keyboard. But of course it also makes for a thicker, heavier computer. But the touchpad on this thing is a big improvement over the little wee ones on here. This one, it even does multi-touch, so if I just put my cursor here and I pinch in and out, that does a zoom, which is a very cool feature. And it's got a fingerprint sensor, which actually I had to program to use my middle finger because my index finger is often too scuffed up to work. And all the stuff really isn't novel for new laptop computers, it's just my old laptop is from 2015, so a lot of things on here are pretty cool and new to me. And what review would be complete without opening it up? And this thing is held together with 9 teeny tiny little star drive screws. And after that, getting it back off was kind of tricky because there's all kinds of little tabs that snap together to hold the rest of it in place. So this back cover actually feels really, really light, almost like it's not metal, but if I scratch it a bit, it's definitely aluminum. I think it's just stamped sheet aluminum instead of machine stuff. And looking inside of it here, I don't see any sort of slot for adding more RAM, so it must be on the motherboard. But the PCIe SSD is underneath this piece of tape, and it does have an extra M.2 slot, so I could add a second SSD. And a giant 99.99 watt-hour battery, because it has to be under 100 watt-hours to be legal to take on a flight. I just stood it up like that, and I'm rendering my video, so the fans are going, and you can hear them. Sound is not too bad, but looking at it in infrared, you can definitely tell where the heat is. The fans are cool because they're sucking in cold air, and this is where the CPU lives, and that's where it's warm. Not hot, but definitely feels warm to the touch. So I had a bit of a hard time making this video because in terms of this computer, well, it's a Windows laptop computer. It's not that exciting. In fact, Dell makes a laptop computer of the same size, looks very similar, and it costs a little bit less too. Except the Dell computer uses a slower CPU, has a smaller battery, and uses Windows 11 Home instead of Pro. So yeah, you get more from one of these than from Dell. And in terms of computers being exciting, I have to admit, most of the time when a computer excites me these days, it's in a bad way. And the funny thing is, when Geekom first contacted me last year, I thought it was a scam email, so I replied figuring, okay, they're going to send the malware payload so then I can report it or look at it. And that turns out it was legit. It was actually from the company. It's just it used a different domain. And so emailing back and forth, I ended up doing a sponsor video with this PC for them last year. And this video is my 5th video with Geekom, and it's been good to work with. So I think they're a good company to buy from.